Good morning, afternoon, or evening, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Routes to Value. This is the fourth in a series of webinars we have been providing since the COVID-19 pandemic started, focused on how we, as a community of sales, marketing, sales enablement, leaders, and educators, overcome an accelerated set of challenges that are in the way of sustainable growth and commercial success. Product silos, hidden capabilities, and poorly articulated economic value to customers are causing performance challenges in achieving growth targets and retaining customers. Capturing more wallet share versus more market share is a shift for many and something every business has to get good at quickly. One thing you'll hear today is that no one is very good at cross-selling. There is a phrase, if you aren't growing a customer, you are losing them, which is an important principle to bear in mind these days. It's a mindset shift from the heavy acquisition-focused mentality so pervasive today, even though for most businesses, 20% of customers drive 80% of the revenue, and oftentimes it's far more extreme than that. I'm Dave Irwin, and as a CEO and executive leader, I've been sponsoring these webinars with Scott for several months now, as I'm keenly interested in these topics. And this one, Routes to Value, is where the rubber hits the road, and I think is the most exciting topic to date in our series. For context, our first webinar highlighted the results of a broad sales enablement survey where 60% of respondents said sales enablement is the linchpin for sales transformation, but struggled to define specifically how in a unified way. Lack of coordination caused by productitis, a term that frames the condition caused by an explosion of confusing and misaligned activities resulting from product silos, led us to the core principles of stratacution, orchestration, and strategic commercial enablement to capture the essence of a more strategic approach to drive sustainable revenue growth versus uncoordinated activities. Sustainability is the key word here. Our second webinar, called Mastering the Middle, was all about not just rebuilding pipelines devastated by the pandemic, but building better pipelines. The centering thought here is to move from an activity-based approach to a process-based one that replaces leaky funnels at high cost with a more efficient demand creation factory that can move deals through verified stages with customers effectively, all by designing productitis out of the system. One of the major opportunities pointed out that got a lot of attention is how much bigger deal sizes can be by engaging senior customer executives earlier in the process and helping them envision the economic value that you can bring to the table. One example was a 40x difference in deal size by doing this effectively through manufacturing valuable sales conversations. Think of the impact of harnessing the ability to sell deals that are 40 times the average new sale. The third webinar drilled in on the commercial ratio, a holistic measure of sales and marketing effectiveness with TCV, a leading private equity firm, to highlight how important it is to reduce inefficiencies and how growth impacts market valuation. Kunal Mehta from TCV shared with us how sales and marketing is viewed from the top down and what their expectations are and approaches to improving performance. We also covered how managing a value communication systems to align customers' perceptions of value with your capabilities and a value-based message that elevates and separates you, puts you in play for much greater wallet share. And that brings us to today, Routes to Value, which is all about this alignment process, connecting the dots, how to get this right, how to think about it, and how to execute. I know you will find this session incredibly valuable with real-world examples, so I'm very excited to introduce Scott and Routes to Value. Scott?
Thank you so much, Dave, and thank you everybody for joining. As always, our format for our webinars are a little bit different. One is we do provide a lot of content in each one of our webinars, so we will provide you the slides in a PDF form and a recording. We've heard that a lot of people get a lot of extra value out of the recording. The other thing that happens is some people like to engage. So if I were listening to a webinar, I'd want to engage with other people on there. So we have the chat available. So Dave and Brian Lambert, if you don't know Brian Lambert, are on the chat session to engage with these topics. So without further ado, our format is pretty simple. We start out by telling you what we're going to tell you. So we're going to pay this out. If you wanted to just find out what Routes to Value are all about, and then be on your way. I'm going to cover that in the first 5 minutes. So basically what I'm going to tell you is, one, your company suffers from productitis. You have many silos, deeply entrenched ways of working within those silos. You have a hyper focus on driving activity, and your company has lost its ability to communicate the economic level value to executive level buyers. Number two, markets don't write checks, customers do. So executive decision makers will select vendors that help them envision a future state and gain buy-in across their organization. Yet we're very over-rotated to going to market and a lot of other practices that we pick up off the street as a quote unquote best practice to match. Why don't we concentrate more on what our customers are looking for us to do rather than projecting onto them what we think they should be doing? The next one is design routes to value by following a model match approach. So we need to be able to drive innovation across our entire commercial process. And what does that mean? It means product, marketing, sales groups have to come together and streamline that across these things to highlight the message challenge that we're facing. And I know that's not easy. So that's why we have these constructs and these tools here for you. So what are routes to value? Let's just get right at that. And we're going to keep revisiting that. It's a simple concept that can get really difficult to understand, but the way we like to think about it is a simplified way. So it's like a strategy designed to help salespeople connect the dots between complex needs of customers and the broad product portfolio of their company. To be a little bit more specific, it's an enabling program. So one of the things that we've found, if you've been following on our webinar series, is there's this giant gap between strategy and tactics. We call it stratacution. An enabling program is designed specifically at that. So it feels strategic and it feels tactical because it's both of those. So there's 5 main deliverables that are associated with a routes to value program. One deliverable is a procedure to follow to drive clarity and cohesion across teams. That's incredibly difficult when you're dealing with lots and lots of stakeholders and you're trying to elevate the value that you're communicating from lower level people to executive level buyers. Then in terms of more tangible deliverables that people can relate to, we have a codified map that we like to call a value map. And it's incredibly simple, but it's not simple in its design. And it's the goal is to help salespeople connect the dots between economic value and the capabilities that you've got. The third set of deliverables would be visual guides designed to help your stakeholders sell internally. So they are designed 100% working backwards from customers, and the goal is your salespeople give them to them, and hopefully they'll be quiet or shut up. That is a huge training element, which gets us into stage 4, which is targeted and engaging adoption plans. We might want to think, hey, after we've built all this stuff, we want to roll it out to the sales force all at once as one big corporate car wash like we're used to. But it's much better if you do it a lot in targeted rollout phases, like first cover your A reps and then your B reps and so on. And then ultimately, in order to maintain this moving forward, you're going to need to build something what's called an operating model. And an operating model really is just a way of working across organizational silos that doesn't exist so that you can maintain that program and make sure all of the messaging and content is cohesive so it's much easier for salespeople to use. So routes to value in concept are really simple. All we're looking at doing is connecting the dots between customers, salespeople, and capabilities. Now that I've paid out what we're going to cover, now I earn the right, hopefully, to tell a story, because unfortunately, simple is really hard. And what we're going to do now is we're going to start breaking this out into different themes, 3 different parts of our series, working backwards from a quote. So this part of our story concentrates on, I love this quote, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so." So of course we're going to tackle hubris, different strategies that have failed, etc. So we're going to start off with CA in 2007. You can ask me why 2007. There's a bunch of reasons for it. One is we have complete data. 2, it's we're not embarrassing anybody because none of the cast of characters are still there. Plus, CA isn't even their own company now; they're part of another organization. But what's valuable here is that CA in 2007 realized that, you know what? We've got a $1 billion, and you can sort of imagine the Dr. Evil pinky going up. We've got a $1 billion opportunity to drive organic growth. And if you're familiar with CA at the time, this is a business that isn't used to growing organically. They grow through acquisitions. So this was a strategy put out by their organization. And when they were communicating that strategy at the end of 2006, beginning of 2007, these are some direct quotes that they highlighted in their investor decks. So they've set the expectation with investors that they got a $1 billion opportunity, and this is what they were going to do. They're going to build a very disciplined direct sales system focused on 4,000 enterprise accounts. The target for us is 800 to 1,000 customers per product. Hopefully you can see some problems here already, but we'll go on with the case study. And basically they're designing the whole go to market sales system as if you were running it from a clean sheet of paper. So if you think about it, where did they get their math? And this is a simple mock-up example. Obviously, white space analysis is a lot more complicated than what I'm showing you here. But really what you're talking about is you plot out 4,000 accounts across the top and then 100 products over there, and then you color code and see account number 1 has this combination of products, so that therefore product 3, you work across the rows and figure out, do we have 800 to 1,000 accounts covered? And if not, boom, we've got an opportunity, and they assign growth associated with those individual accounts. Well, does that work? What do you think? Does it work to just arbitrarily assign products? Well, I'll tell you, one of the problems that CA had is that they don't, it's arguable about how many products you have. And all of us have this problem. What actually counts as a product? So you could argue they had between over 1,000 individual products or 16 different solution areas that they came to. So there's a lot of configuration or challenges there. But how did they do? Let's compare how they did. So if we look at this, this chart, going across the bottom are the numbers. So the 3,943, that's $3.9 billion, okay? And in 2007, that was what their total revenues were. And what I did is I put this to scale. So this is the $1 billion opportunity, so what they need to fill in. So how did they do in 2007? So the year-over-year net growth from 2006 to 2007 was $147 million. And you can see here, I want to pay attention to the margin thing. You can see maybe what's happening with this business. So the margins were pretty good. But then look at 2008, the margins went through the roof and their growth went through happened. So it looks like the strategy's paying out. 2009 hit, and then the revenues declined 6 million, but their profitability went even higher. And in 2010, they weren't able to to get back to any of the growth momentum, but they were still squeezing out profitability. So by 2010, what had happened? If you look at this overall market growth opportunity, if we were to even look at it further, most of this was done by acquisition. So what happened was the organic growth numbers weren't hit, but if we look at the overall growth targets, it was 55% of what their growth potential was. And by 2010, the entire executive team had been let go. And that's the reason I think this is really important is look how you'd find that hard to believe with going from 212 million in EBITDA to 1.2 billion in profitability off of 4.3 billion. So the moral of the story here is, here's another interesting point about the business. They made a big deal about highlighting all the investments they're going to make in that growth. And I like this quote in particular because it gets us to thinking, and maybe we can relate to our own businesses. I think that we spend now more in training per frontline sales professional than almost anyone in the industry. And that doesn't just include the days they are out of the field. That's just the investment in content, skills training, and to deliver those people so that they can be more effective. And then we've given them the tools to be effective. Great customer relationship management, CRM account planning tools, and we have this sales workbench out there. So throwing a lot of things at it. What's the problem? What was a challenge? Well, there's 2 points of failure here that hopefully all of us can recognize, and that pattern at CA repeats itself over and over and over again. A lot of companies who try to grow organically that have broad product portfolios that have large accounts that they want to sell to. Essentially, one problem is productitis. With 100 or 1,000 or even 16 solution sets, if that's the focal point, we want 800 to 1,000 per account. What do you think the focus is? Us, our products. We have to sell it out there. The second thing is look at all the things that they put out there focusing on salespeople, but there wasn't really any investments on orchestrating or organizing all of that information. So this is the point of where that sales burden that Gartner's talking a lot about now, it's a real thing. It's just one of those things that's invisible. So let's diagnose productitis and get into that a little bit more. And really, let's focus on the target for us is 800,000 or 800 to 1,000 customers per product, if that's our focus. If you're product centric, what your focus is the value of each of those individual products. But if you were customer centric, you'd be focusing on what are the business outcomes. The attributes of how those that value would happen would be the features of those products. Yet if you're customer focused, you're going to be concentrating on the capabilities that enable those outcomes to happen. If you're focused on being product centric, then what your barometer of success is how your competitors are doing. But if you're a customer-centered organization, your barometer of success is whether or not the wallet owners or the adult wallet owners are meeting with you and if they're happy. If you're product-centric and you're focused on how you measure the impact, you build many ROI tools, which of course CA built many different ROI tools to capture the specific benefits of those individual products. If you're customer-centric, the way you measure impacts are the measurable results of the outcomes that you work with. If you're product-centric, how do you focus on the relatability of your offers? You build use cases. If you're customer-centric, you concentrate on scenarios, real-world scenarios. And then how do you create proof? If you're product-centric, you do demos. If you're customer-centric, you do benefit realization. So this diagnostic process is really a cautionary tale as we move into 2020. Most of our businesses, and if you pay attention to the global 2,000 companies, those businesses have been largely unimpacted by COVID. The small businesses have been substantially impacted, but the large companies, for most cases, are getting larger. So for us to sell, we're going to want, ultimately, businesses are going to start trying to sell to some of those big companies. And we're going to have to cross-sell lots of things because we're going to have to get through procurement organizations and the like. So the reason that CA is such a great cautionary tale is because the business world hasn't really improved much in cross-selling. So the approaches to cross-selling hasn't changed. Productitis is more acute today than it has ever been before. And the sales burden has gotten much worse because the selling environment is getting more complicated. So let's break down productitis. It's really a systems failure. When we talk about messaging, there's a whole bunch of little gears that just aren't working. It's misaligned value. The value is framed in your terms, not your client's terms. And that creates low impact messaging across the board, which makes it hard for salespeople to assemble what they're talking about. There are packaging challenges. Think about if you go into your organization and think about all the SKUs you've got available and trying to figure out exactly how to put a price quote together. There are so many different packaging challenges because there's just so many different ways to slice product bundles. So it makes it very difficult to create solutions. You have incomplete materials. So one product group might create materials one way, another product marketing group might create materials something differently. They want to push it all out. And what it does is create doubt amongst salespeople about your company's ability to deliver. You have tools that aren't even designed for salespeople in the first place. They're designed just to be built, maybe to check BART, and they're not useful. So salespeople create their own. And is that what we want salespeople to be doing? To me, that's part of the burden that shouldn't be their job. And then probably what's worse is when you actually go try to sell outcomes and connect the dots, it's almost impossible to get an answer when you're trying to connect the dots across many, many individual people in the labyrinth of your organization. And that creates loss of credibility, not only for the people inside for the company with sales, but also for salespeople with executive buyers. Imagine you not being able to have an answer or how certain parts are going to work. So the other challenge then that happens is we misdiagnose what the challenge is so that we fix salespeople. Now, this isn't a critique saying Challenger, value selling, Sandler, Miller Hyman, sales managers, or internal sales training are bad. It's just the focal point is how do we fix how to sell? And then on the other side of the equation, all the information that we've got coming at it is what we've got. And there's a giant, huge gap between the two that puts the backs on, which breaks the backs of sellers, which is, so why do our customers care? And all of the sales methodologies out there are pretty good that are teaching you those techniques to want to do it, but they don't equip you with the content to be able to do it and that information. So here's an example of why this matters. So I'm going to pepper many quotes and feedback and data from executive level buyers throughout to anchor this. Here's one of them. We were pretty excited about the potential of working with this one vendor from our first meeting, but we kept having meetings thinking they knew something we didn't know or would keep going on around in circles. We wanted details about what was needed to get started. They kept giving more information about their products. After a while, I just got frustrated and sort of decided it was too much hassle for what it's worth. Does that happen in your organization? Do you see that happening? This happens a lot. Why not? If all you have is information about products and not what to do with it, of course this is going to happen. So let's shift gears into the next quote. So the first part was, it's not what you don't, was sort of confronting conventional wisdom. And the conventional wisdom is the product isn't what's valuable, it's the outcome that's valuable. Well, now let's confront something maybe even more difficult. The definition of insanity is doing the same things over and over again and expecting a different result. So why did I start with a story from 2007? Because that story is exactly what a lot of your companies are doing today. We haven't learned. 13 years later, we're still beating our head against the wall and expecting a different result. So let's start this process, instead of looking at sales and marketing techniques and scorecards and best practices and all that other stuff. Why don't we work backwards from what do customers think? So here's some data that says, so first of all, what does an executive think an interaction with a salesperson is valuable or not? Well, they say a salesperson clearly shows they understand my business issues and can plainly articulate how to solve them. Not rocket science. This has been true for as long as I've been around in sales. So how often does this happen? The woman on the left represents IT executive level buyers, and the man on the right represents business executive buyers, 13% and 11%. So we could look at it one of two ways. One is we could look at the state of sales as terrible, or we could look at, boy, we got a lot of room to be much better. And in the plains of the Serengeti, if you're getting chased by a tiger or actually a cheetah, you don't need to be the fastest antelope. You just don't need to be the slowest one. So we got a lot of room for improvement here. So why we're always going to have jobs as salespeople is because of this data. So this is executives being asked, how prepared are salespeople? And what's interesting is 62% of those of the executives said that salespeople were knowledgeable about companies and products. But when you look at the things that they care about, like knowledgeable about my business, again, we're talking about, hey, you're selling to Johnson & Johnson, you're selling to Merck. How do you not know about their business? Can relate to my role and responsibility. I'm an executive. My job description is posted on the website. Understand my issues and how you can help. 22% have relevant examples or case studies to share with me. Across the board, these are high failure rates from the point of view of executive buyers. It makes us ask the question, what are we doing for equipping sellers? So to add some color with it, here's some executive decision makers, what executive decision makers say. I'll read one. I added more text in there because I've found that most of you guys really like these quotes. So I'll just read one. And then you can have this when you get the slides. I'm reading the bottom one. Most of our problems really involve getting executives from different functional groups and IT teams together on the same page. I've pulled back and working with vendors when I sense they are not savvy enough to appreciate all the politics involved with these major cross-functional projects. The last thing I need is someone who is politically blind stepping on a landmine that could blow up the whole effort. I've stopped engaging with vendors for exactly that reason several times. So you can see here, it's not so much how do we learn the technique, how do we deliver the pitch, but it's do we have context and empathy about how complex our clients' organizations are. So here's more data. Do executives spend more money or prefer or select you more if you're in earlier? The answer is yes. So what this is saying is that executives will select the vendors or suppliers who engage with them early and help them envision what success will look like 74% of the time. When you go in and show up responding to needs, you're going to win maybe 26%, but you're also in a bake-off with many, many more people. I think what's fascinating is when you hear some of the quotes about the envisioning part, how little competition you actually have. So let's look at these quotes. I can read both of these because they're short. So without question, we work with a vendor that helps us figure it all out. This is like, duh, like what else more do I put in this quote? But I like this one. Oh, absolutely, and it's even more than that. Once we trust a given vendor, we'll bounce ideas off them before talking to anyone else. If they can help us, they tell us, and we just work with them without even telling anyone else, any of the other suppliers. So you can see building that rapport is worth it, not only pursuing that one individual opportunity, but if you want to keep cross-selling and upselling, you're going to build those relationships and you're going to get a lot of opportunities that most people don't even see or hear from the first place. So you're generating demand for you while you're also winning those opportunities. So here's another thing that's really interesting. And again, I really hope you'll dig into this when you get the slides. What's fascinating is there's that step when an executive's trying to figure something out and, hey, we've got this idea, but then I need to really put it into, I need to shape it so that I can either justify the funding that I'm asking for or pass the hat to get funding, whatever the model is that I'm looking for. So what these questions are about are really, what are the tools that executives need to do the internal selling? So what these are is that 57% of executives expect a conceptual model or a framework of how the pieces all fit together. How many of you are your companies providing that? Or a process map outlining the things that your people must accomplish, or a set of requirements or recommendations, or even just some sort of stakeholder mapping so we can figure out the people issues. A technical schematic or framework, most companies provide that, most vendors provide that, but a clear way to make sure that the initiatives continuously add value. In other words, how am I going to drive ongoing support? And what these numbers represent, by the way, is these executives were given a scale of 1 to 5 to answer. These are the 5s. These are the very, very, very important. So across the board, you could say that this is a mix, a toolkit, if you will, of resources that they need. Wouldn't it be great if you were to be able to build that toolkit for them and then have something to collaborate with? So I'm foreshadowing a little bit. So I'm going to read the top one this time. Here's more executive quotes. In most cases, we're going to always work with the vendor that invests the time and has the attitude to help us be successful. Keep focused on that word there, be successful. I think the only exception that comes to mind would be outsourcers. My goal is to always drive more value for less and less money. Their goal is to keep my spending the same. It works great for the first 2 years, but over time our expectations are too far apart. What's really interesting is these are very simple concepts to read, but yet how often do we factor them in our go-to-market approaches or what we're looking to accomplish? So basically what this says is what they want are capabilities to make them successful. And please don't concentrate on the words. The words at the bottom are there for you for the deck. What I want you to think about though is across your company, you're organized and so focused on individual products, you're missing all the value that you're bringing to bear. So you have labor that's available that you might be able to use. So some clients have figured out, some customers have figured out that they can do some staff swapping for knowledge transfer. They've done that. You have tremendous amounts of data that if you thought about packaging up could be valuable. You could either make it available for free or you could sell it. It doesn't really matter. The whole issue is be more thoughtful about all the value that you've got. You've got subject matter expertise. The vision that you've got for your company is very valuable. I'll give you an example. I interviewed one executive or a series of executives for one of the clients. And one of the feedback that I got is the reason that he's still staying with this business is simply because of the vision of the company. That's the number one reason that they're still staying there. But yet we tend to think about vision as being too strategic and not really that important, and we don't focus enough on it. So the point is there's all these different capabilities, knowledge, skills, processes, customers. Customers are an asset too, access to other people. There's all these levers that you can pull, and we need to be able to make these more available to salespeople so they can better paint by numbers and bring these capabilities to bear with the focus of making our clients successful. We don't need to charge for everything to make somebody successful, but across our businesses, we've got all of these resources. We're just not organizing it. So the whole idea, though, is to drive an outcome for their business. Now, what is this chart? I know it looks like a nice little neat thing, but how would we use it? But really, the difficulty is when you're an executive and you're thinking very broadly about what your outcome you're looking to achieve, there's a lot of answers that you need to put together to get clarity. And just like journalists talk about the 5 W's and the H, that's really what we're talking about. It's sort of like an investigative story about putting together an outcome. So the first part is what? What do they want? The achieved end state. Do you message to how you help paint the picture for what an achieved end state is? The second, who? If you're messaging to lower level buyers, that executive adult wallet owner is going to delegate you down. How do you frame that achieved end state for the targeted audience that you're after? I know that's a difficult question, but a lot of companies aren't really super focused on the who, what that executive owner is that they can make successful. Then the next question would be how what's the initiative that they would go to bear? What's very fascinating is at the executive level, they fund initiatives. They don't say, hey, I'm going to go buy that product. Why do they fund initiatives? Because an initiative has a scope, it's got a focus, it's got a start and end date, all of those different basic blocking and tackling things that give them control. And why? Because they want measurable results. That's what it's all about. I'm here, I'm a business person, I want measurable results. Does measurable results mean 80 lines for spreadsheets? No, it just means the achieved end state. What's the delta between the current state and the achieved end state? And how do you communicate it? So where is this work going to be performed? In all of the different stakeholders. The executive owner isn't going to do anything, but because we talked earlier about cross-functional problems, we're going to zoom into that more. Where the work is going to be performed is going to be across many different silos. If we don't have a way to navigate all that stuff, we're not helping the executive owner, and then that leg of the outcome wheel might not work. And then when are you going to give me benefit realization? They're going to want to see some benefit short term and then build it over time. Do we have a flexible enough way where we can put something in front of them that's short term, but it builds on each other? Or everything is just cram bam, thank you, ma'am. So this is what the whole idea of the outcome is how do we paint by numbers, if you will, the picture and organize all that content? And we'd have to do a lot of the work to shape it, but then we're not even done yet. That doesn't mean we give them this. We have to frame it out and piece part all of these different integrated elements over time. So let's review. Let's go back to what's simple. What we're after is connecting the dots between customers, salespeople, and capabilities. You have an overwhelming amount of capabilities, and customers want it in different forms. We probably don't have a way of organizing all of that. It's just out there everywhere, or structured based on our business units of how we choose to organize ourselves. We have salespeople in the middle, and those salespeople will be much more valuable for us and to customers if they were considered value to executives, because they'll be able to connect the dots between more capabilities and cross-sell more. Unfortunately, only 13% of them are considered valuable. And we want executives who are very eager and willing. Hopefully you took the quotes as being very motivated to want to work and partner with companies that drive successful outcomes. So they're there waiting, and it will be highly differentiated for you. Okay, so let's review this route to value construct then. So in order to start creating simplicity, we have to map out some complexity. So the elements of this are, in terms of the customer, we need to be able to map out a role chart. So we want to create patterns of stakeholders and their common relationships. Remember some of the quotes that I shared earlier about knowing the politics and things like that. Personas just don't do that. Personas are, frankly, I think really silly. We're in the business world, you have roles, and roles are knowable, and roles tend to work with other roles. So this information about what is going to be on somebody's mind and what friction they might have across other departments is highly knowable if you work backwards from that. If we're concentrating on personas and trying to sell to individuals, then we're mightily limiting our opportunities. When we get to the value map part, what we need to have is a picture to help salespeople manage the air traffic control of all the different conversations. Imagine all the different perspectives of different people in an organization. Say you've got 11 people or 20 people involved in a deal. How does that sales team manage all of those folks? And then also, if you're dealing with 20 people, you probably have 5 or 6, maybe 10 people inside your company that you're dealing with. How do you get everybody on message so people don't go to the lowest common denominator and push product all the time? And then ultimately, how do you create a product palette? So think about this as your Bob the Painter, if you remember him, and you have your color palette. How do we organize it to where you can use it, rather than organizing it into all of the individual products and services and the like? So you want to be able to organize your capabilities based on how customers will use them. That's a product palette. So we're going to zoom in into each of these with a much bigger focus on the role chart side, because that's what's important. The key point here is that if we really want to be communicating and really upselling, we have to recognize this fact. Value isn't a one-way street. We don't assign the value based on an individual product. Economic value is co-created over time. We have to help our salespeople mix and match all those opportunities to help your clients envision what success will look like in the future, and also imagine all of the different ways that we can match many capabilities inside our company and combine them. If we're just too grooved on selling a product or selling a professional service, we're never going to provide that mix, that tapestry of capabilities that customers are looking for. So let's talk about economic value very simply. Obviously, we can go into the weeds on this topic, so it's a challenging topic when you say the word economic. But really what it comes down to is your company should have a vision for where you're taking its customers. So that vision, we have to find a way to get into the bloodstream of an individual global company. So that's us on the left, and that's the target customer that we're looking for. Unfortunately, the world, it's not about you. And we get really caught up around the axle around talking about our vision around our products. We sell them that product, or we're going to organize or assign our products, our quotas by products. Maybe it might be better if we assigned our quotas by wallet owners. But your company is organized around those products and track individual transactions, not the value creation process. So when we flip over, the first thing that I've already highlighted this a little bit about giving my hand away about the silliness of personas. I know that from Sales 101, we are selling to human beings and people buy from people, but you are selling to entities first. When you are doing B2B selling, people have jobs and roles, and the higher you go in the organization, the more they think about the entity first. The reason that they think about the entity first is because they're responsible for an entire department, and their personal reputation is based more on that department. So we have to change our focus a bit if we want to sell to the adult level and sell cross-functionally and do cross-selling. We got to think differently and start thinking about how do we balance the difference between an entity and a person instead of making everything about an individual. Now, the one thing that's really empowering once you start thinking about it is all those entities, all those different companies, they cluster around and they're in an industry. And that industry is impacted. There are a set number of predictable forces that you can go and map out that are impacting everybody. And if you do the work to map it out, you're in a better position to figure out, these are the influences that are happening. What happens is a lot of companies have the salespeople do this mapping through SWOT analysis or any of their account planning, which is kind of silly because these things are way more knowable, and you probably should have one or two people who are really good at this and doing that and making it available and working on your messaging that way. The other thing that's very knowable is that based on those drivers, there's only a few handful of strategies a company can pursue. So at the top level, you can look at, and this is why a lot of people stress reading annual reports, but I think we've got to do more to break those down and make it more accessible because annual reports are getting more complex because of regulations. What we need to be able to do, though, is recognize that the CEO and the executive team only have a few levers to pull. And based on those drivers that you've got, you should know what those levers that are pulling are and how they match to you. And don't make it so hard and call them, whatever you want, business drivers, executive priorities, or whatever you want to call them. We're making that too hard for salespeople. In reality, there's just ways that you can package that up and already design that out. The next thing is, if you start mapping this out, you're going to realize most of the business problems that your customers are responding to cut across organizational silos. Like those gosh darn customers, right? And their experience. And how many different departments does that cut across? Or if you're being Amazoned and you're in the distribution industry, you don't have any idea what departments that's facing. So the business pressures that are impacting most of your customers cut across organizational silos. Well, that's good and bad. The good is it creates a lot of opportunity and coachable moments for those executives. The bad is departments don't really know how to work together each other. So it creates a lot of resistance to change, and we want to be in the business of selling change. So the next thing that we have to be able to do is be able to orchestrate that complexity is how you get in early. So if you're able to organize all that by mapping out the stakeholders and knowing what those relationships are, which by the way, these are all knowable, you create a high degree, due to a high degree of specialization that happens inside companies, the number of stakeholders involved in servicing an outcome is exploding. We like to call this navigating an agreement network. So you can imagine if this is a group of individuals and the light green person here is the person that's driving it, they're going to have to get buy-in from the executive leadership. How many of these people can say no? And if not enough of these people are on board, is this person going to drive forward with it, or are they going to give it lip service? How much are they going to drive for change if they can't get enough alignment here? This is your huge opportunity as an organization, is to help get these people on the same page. It's even worse because with specialization, am I a specialist in a process or am I a specialist in a silo? And let me give you a really simple example of that. A call center would operate as a silo. The customer experience process cuts across. What's the friction point and who does what in those opportunities when we're running across cross-functional change? So what happens is we get more and more process-centric. So the process-centered people learn their process techniques and the silo people learn their disciplines. And what happens is we get this phenomenon that I like to call English to English translation. We're separated by language of specificity. So part of What we can do is teach our salespeople and map out pictures and communicate more with pictures to reduce or overcome this English to English friction problem. These are all real world barriers that prevent internal buying and selling. And guess what? Going back to that outcome pattern, if you are disciplined in that, you can map out and pattern match these things. And you're going to see the same scenario happen over and over and over and over and over and over again. You just have to be able to do the work to create that first one. And here's another good thing. There are archetypes or 6 patterns. There's only 6 patterns of outcomes out there. There are initiative level patterns all the way up to business transformation ones. And they all, basically, they all follow the same kind of script, the same kind of play. Think about it like movies, and there's, formats of movies. Oh, I've seen this one before. There are all of these different patterns, and each one of these different patterns are very predictable, and you can map it out. So what does this mean? What it means is you can follow those patterns to illuminate your value and create that map. And that map, the more iconic and the more visual and the more it looks like reality, the easier it is to get more in alignment. The second you start putting more and more words into it, you're going to run into that English to English translation problem. So that's an example of a value map. I'm going to give you specific examples. I'm just trying to speak to the concepts first. Then you want to be able to map out the role chart, so it is knowable who the cast of characters are. You shouldn't be surprised if the security people and the networking people are arguing. You shouldn't be surprised by that. Your company should know that and have a plan to make both of them happy. There's got to be a win-win here, guys. So you should know that. If you keep running into similar problems where your clients, deals go south because your clients are arguing, you haven't done a good enough job of mapping out your role charts. These are all knowable things. And then you can organize based on what those clients need, the combinations of capabilities. You don't have to be so laser focused on just selling a product. Maybe one thing that helps is just to do a workshop. Maybe you eat that workshop, or you say, hey, we're going to charge you $20,000 for it, and if you guys buy it, we'll discount it, your products and services. Many companies have techniques like that, and we just got caught up over the axle because, oh, we can't do it, or it's not an individual product or not. But if you look at this palette, you can organize things by product and categorize it that way, by services, by account management. Anything that you do for a customer, you should be thinking about what's the economic value for it for the company. If it's not adding value, then maybe you shouldn't be doing it. So here's an example of a product palette to just organize those capabilities. One of the things that's very fascinating that we've found is that a lot of SaaS companies can get a lot more traction after they realize that they can sell services on the front end and actually create more. After they have to get over that whole fact that our management doesn't want us to be selling, or our investors don't want us to be selling professional services. No, they want you to get subscription revenue, but you can get subscription revenue way more by leading with professional services to help your client feel like they're going to be successful. Plus, you want to have a high renewal rate. But there's many capabilities that you can start deciding once you start embracing the idea of capabilities and packaging them up. In this color-coded map, some would be you'd have optional, the light gray are things that you provide for free. Whatever this mix looks like, these are all things that you can pattern match out. So here's some success stories or some real-life examples of companies using routes to value. So here's a quote from one company, and I'm going to show you some of the examples here along the way, but I just wanted to use this as a pivot point about once you start mapping and realizing these are all repeatable patterns, you can start doing the work to etch it out. So what we ended up getting is this easily understandable vision. Now we sell that vision. Not every customer buys into that vision right away, but they say, this is where we need to go. Then I get a foothold in their business, pieces of their account, and continue to work towards that vision and continue to increase my income in that account. This is an SVP of sales and marketing. So what are some examples of value maps? These are all examples of value maps. I mentioned the outcome patterns. So on the left is a operational optimization strategy. This is a unified, data-driven, cloud-based SaaS platform that has the vision to transform the transportation industry. Well, you've got to transform a lot of things and get a lot of different executives to work together. That's a very hard thing. You need to be able to paint a vision or picture of what all that looks like with the fewest amount of words possible so that you get the client talking and getting them engaged. Here's the middle one is an example of shared service value optimization. This is a large managed services company, and they have consulting services, and their focus is on providing a vision for transformational end user computing services. If you think about bring your own device from a few years ago, or more and more work from home kind of activities, think about the pressures that's happening on an IT organization. They don't necessarily have the thoughts about how they would organize it. So in this particular case, it's first you do this, then you do that, and then it maps to different structures that they need to do. And then of course, the company has different services there. One key point here is when this was rolled out, one of the SVP of operations took that picture, asked for it, and made a poster of it and held that up in their wall. I can't stress enough how awesome that is, because now you own the vision, not only for that person, but their entire department. And they have a budget of about $2 billion. So that's a picture I would love to have on the wall of somebody with that large of a budget. Or we go to a different scenario. So we'll click down even further in terms of value delivery world. And this is a company that does networking services, and they specialize in video multimedia, providing consulting and managed services. So basically it's helping their corporate clients figure out how they're going to handle multimedia and manage all the bandwidth and all the traffic and the security and all that, and whether or not that group has enough of that expertise and how they balance that expertise and balance all those workloads. All of those things are complex, but as you can see, each one of these are single pictures that the sales teams have used in front of clients. So here's some results of each of these companies. It takes about 3 months to roll something like this out into the first wave. The first scenario, we've seen a 50% increase in deal size. They set a record for the largest deal that they've had, going from a per user base of average about $22 to $76. In the middle one, this was rolled out to a control group, and within 2 weeks of it was 100% adopted in the control group within 2 weeks of adoption. And the control group, which had 10 reps, generated $350 million in additional pipeline just by having a structured way to do discovery and have conversations. And then the other scenario was a 100% increase in revenue for the whole company that year. This was a brand new product line for this company. 100% of the reps had sold one, which was incredibly fantastic. Also, too, the highlight is that this is a much more profitable product than they're used to, so their margins went up 300 basis points. So how do you use this to guide the buying process? So we go back to that first picture, and it's more of a transformative approach. You got to give people a landing place to get started. So in this map, you can zoom in and say, hey, let's focus on the driving process and map out those stakeholders. So you want to be able to say, look, we're going to give you the idea, how they work, who's involved. These are all client-facing tools. So you map out and make it as simple to digest as possible. Here's how you help the client envision success. Here's how you map out the process map. Remember we talked about process map? Of course you can do an 8 million degree one, but the point is you want to put enough of it out there and get the client to start taking it over themselves and putting their own words into it. So the whole goal is to get them talking and have this be good enough, and then not have all the answers, let them fill in the blanks. Remember, you have to co-create value. The next part then is how do you identify all the different stakeholders? So this is a circle by numbers approach by saying, does anybody in sales need to be involved? Tell me about them. So you're using this picture in front of them. You're helping them think through all the stakeholders and the where part, but it's much easier to do all that discovery and that buyer mapping. The next part is you want to be able to give your client a path or a vision on how to go about doing it. So you say, look, here's how you go about it. Here's how some of our other clients have gone through and messaged this to gain buy-in. What do you think? and then you keep your mouth shut and let them own that idea. And then what you also want to be able to do is surface any risks that might be happen. So you slide this in front of them and say, these are things that you might be asking yourself. Are any of these things on your mind right now? The whole idea is you want to get those unstated things that we all think about the day after the meeting. It happens with buyers too. You want to get them out on the table as quickly as possible. Okay, so now we're wrapping it up. So that what we highlighted first was, let's challenge our conventional wisdom about cross-selling. The second part is, let's recognize or embrace that we can model that our customers are more complex and dynamic than we give them credit for, and we can actually model that out. And if we model that out, we can create value maps and tools that are client-facing to make everybody's job easier. So what should you do about it? So we talked about routes to value as an enabling program. How might you put it together? What I'm going to do is concentrate. We're not really going to have a whole bunch of slides, or actually no slides, on operating model or engagement adoption plans. I think you can sort of envision those yourself. But really what is most important here is, how are you going to drive cross-functional alignment inside your company, because you have the same problems as your customers do. So how do you create clarity and cohesion across teams? Well, this is where it gets a little, I don't want to say heavy, but where we actually have to do some deep thinking and embrace this concept of design thinking. And design thinking really is a method that focuses on synthesis to help take complexity out of human-based complex situations. So it means we need tools to help think differently. So our approach is as simple as this. I know you want to read this left to right, and this is purposely designed this way so that we concentrate first on 1, model our customers. 2, map the capabilities that we have to that model of customers. 3, how do we put the things in the hands of salespeople that they can use, that they can match with a model so they can connect the dots between the capabilities and the customer issues. So how do you do it? Well, it's pretty straightforward. Each of the different deliverables that we talked about, you need a value map. You're going to need the buyer guides like we shared with you. You're going to need to have a phased adoption plan, so where salespeople are teaching each other. And you're going to need an operating model to drive cross-functional work. That's it. Those are the basic things that you're going to need. The challenge is you're going to have to drive that in a coordinated way, which means the teams that you assemble, you have to have a way to get them all together. So that means you need to start by helping everybody envision what's possible, which is really hard because a lot of people are going to have productitis. The next thing that you're going to need to do is help them envision success and put out a lot of the details out there so that they can get immersed in the overall process. Then you're going to need to move to simulating the experience that the salespeople and the customers are going to have more and more and more. Why? Because only the salespeople and the customers have that experience, and it's invisible to the rest of the company. You have to expose that. You have to let people see it, or people are going to analyze things to death, and you're going to get more and more productitis. Then you have to go build a working model and actually get some people to go try it, and the people who are doing it can't be defensive and say, well, that doesn't work. They need to be very curious and test and refine. And then finally, once you have those things out, do a phased rollout. Here's the ways to think about what that could look like. In the what's possible, you ask your team to put things up on the board, start sharing, putting their ideas out on paper so they can see to what degree they have customer alignment or not. Then in terms of envisioning success, you want to map out all of their work in it and put it in digestible parts and iterate and iterate and iterate until it gets simple. We've talked about in our webinars about orchestration being the key goal of sales enablement moving forward. Well, here's what orchestration looks like in action. How you design that wall and put the information there so people can actually see the information rather than just say, oh, it's go visit our SharePoint drive. But then also, how do you select the teams for people to work together and make sure you are picking cross-functional teams? What are the exercises that they're working on? What are the tools to do the teaming? And then how do you manage all of that stuff through principles, priorities, the exercises, the environment, and the degree of engagement and what that looks like? All of those things can come together and help you synthesize and gain that clarity that you need. And then finally, you want to be able to simulate this. This is an example of where all of these people in the room had to role play out the value map before we move on and introduce it to salespeople. And the goal was you had to do it 5 times and play both a buyer and seller role, and then tweak it constantly. And we had a change management grid to update it. So these are the things that are happening there. These are all things that you can do. So to wrap up, you can answer the call. Somebody has to step up and help drive cross-selling. Why not you? Some questions that you can be asking yourself. Can your team execute and accomplish it? If yes, great. Then what can you go and design yourself? If no, where can you get help? If you do this, what won't you do? What is the value of increasing your deal size by 50% or 25% versus the things that you're working on today? What political capital will you have to do? Who would you have to map to and drive this forward? Who would you need some sponsorship from? Where will you see early results when you get benefit realization? And then what cultural barriers might be in the way that you can design in to overcome? So what we've covered here to wrap up, we've covered that your company suffers from productitis. You've got many silos deeply entrenched. Hopefully we've proven that case. Markets don't write checks, customers do. If you engage customers how they want to, they'll write you more checks and bigger ones. Designing routes to value is a design issue. It's not a deliverable issue. It's not a best practice issue. It's not a process issue. It's a design issue. You have to embrace that because you have to eliminate a lot of complexity. So what are your next steps? If you're interested in about this and figuring out, I know it's probably fuzzy where to get started, contact me. Let's review your plan. What are your thoughts on how to do it? Or the next step that you can do is register for our next webinar, where we're going to focus on uncovering the hidden commercial costs. So we can really talk about moving the commercial ratio, really expose where a lot of money is being spent or not spent. And there's the registration today. Or you can learn more about orchestration on the podcast that Brian and Lambert and I do. And you can visit it at insidese.com. So thank you so much for your time. Here's my contact information if you'd like to do that. I know we're right at time, so if you'd like to leave, go ahead. If you want to stay for extra time, I guess we had some penalties in our football match. Dave, any thoughts and reactions from what we got on the chat?
Yeah, there's a lot of great comments and thoughts in terms of different areas. I think one of the questions comes down to, who's in charge of collecting and disseminating customer information, customer feedback, customer data. And I know what your answer is going to be, which is that's the orchestration job. But any thoughts on methods or ways you've seen companies effectively disseminate customer feedback to be able to translate it into, a route to value from the customer end?
So what's challenging is I've been dealing with this for quite some time. So we have a lot of people who want to build, say, customer journey maps, but they do it with limited input or limited political exposure. Or we say we want to build personas and we go interview just a few people and we don't have a spec yet. Part of the challenge that I've found is there is no one person to go to. We actually did some exercises way back when I was at Forrester at that, and we uncovered this huge gap. And what's interesting about it is if you take an approach where you bring a lot of people together and expose the problem, sort of follow in that design thinking approach, let people expose it, what happens is people will chip in and help. But if you do it in sort of the command and control, I got to go kiss this ring and I got to get a budget from this person or that person, it just doesn't work. So part of the nuance here is you can either escalate it and go all the way to the CEO, which we've done before, but that is, I think that's extreme. They probably don't want to hear that. So what I do is I'd say, hey, look, let's work with the product marketing team and say if you're in sales enablement, and let's see if what we can do, and say, let's build a program for going after the director of networking, for example. I'm just speaking arbitrarily. And the challenge will be to not make the content biased to be one-to-one to a product. So you probably need to get an observer and create maybe a panel of observers. It really helps when you get outside people, obviously, who know what they're doing that can manage it. There's still ways around doing it. I've found that getting people who are in delivery and consulting together creates some very interesting phenomenon. Typically, they will disagree with each other about what the driver is. But when you add the time dimension and say, well, the consulting person is probably earlier on in the customer's success cycle, and the delivery person is later on, maybe what they're dealing with is a stage issue, not a buyer absolute issue. So the difficulty here would be thinking about this in 3 dimensions. So what I would do is I'd go back and listen to this call again, pay more attention to those areas, and then just get people talking. The other thing to do would be listen to your A reps, and don't try really hard to pin them down on exact words because they probably don't have it. They are like canaries in a coal mine, and they see lots of things. So just try to listen to them, draw things out for them, and get them to react. But unfortunately, there tends to be no one who's responsible, and a lot of people will say they're responsible, but when you start breaking it down, no one's really responsible, and that's part of the problem.
Right. I also, just going to the other side on the product palette, which is such an interesting concept, how often do you run into situations where there's a lot of missing or hidden capabilities that are really valuable from your perspective to a customer, but are often not sort of listed or materialized in what the reps have to?
Oh my God, it's all the time. It's everywhere. I'll give you the couple pockets for that. Your customer success people, or your customer, the people who go in and do the big installments of your big projects that trying to build that first model to get a cross-functional team to bear, interview them, because they know so much, and they don't really have a space because they sort of get yelled at because no one wants to hear about how much complexity they've got. They offer so much value because you have to learn so many tricks to get cross-functional people to work together, and they've learned them all. And they've got nobody to listen to. And you can deliver that through podcasts or make it easier for them. That's one source. Another source of great value and insight would be the customer review board, not the user group, but you will probably have a more executive level group. Maybe they're providing input to the roadmap. Get invited to that and just listen. Don't ask any questions, just listen. Because the way that those people talk about what value is so radically different than what you hear on the QBR calls. So to me, those would be the 2 pockets. And another area that I find really valuable is to talk to the customer support people and ask them to inventory. Well, I would do the inventorying, actually. I wouldn't ask them to do that because that's rude. But you ask them questions about what kind of calls they're getting, and then ask them which of the problems are customer problems, user generated problems, and which are the ones that are product problems. And what's fascinating is there's a whole slew of bugs, if you will, that your company's working on. However, at least half of them are user problems because they don't know how to use it. But the customer support people just don't know how to bring it up, or they don't think it's their place to do it. So to me, those are the 3 great sources of information, and you just have to work on your listening skills.
That's great. Well, I think one other comment and a final one was just on altitude level, having the right conversation based on the outcome interests of key stakeholders. Maybe you can comment on just how often that is wrong, and what happens when you get it right.
How often is it wrong? Well, the data shows it's pretty high when it's wrong. So let's just cover why it's wrong. People don't role play. And when they do role play, they're geared to prove that their product or their rap, the pitch that they've built is right and it's gamed rather than genuine and authentic. It takes a lot of work to put together a good exercise. But when you get it right, it becomes, it's like this propeller of a wave that it's almost like you can't get out of it. And in a good way, it's like a tsunami of value. And, playing catch up is challenging because you have to worry about making sure everybody else in your company is on message to that executive. And it's pretty easy for any one of those people to show up in a meeting and blurt out a product-based solution, and you look like a jerk. So there's a lot of things to it. I'll give you one example, and then we'll wrap up because I think this is really illuminating. One company got a meeting with the CEO of a big consumer goods company. And they worked on their wrap. This is a business unit within a business unit. They worked on their wrap a lot. And they basically went in and said, we can save you $1.5 million. Again, Dr. Evil, but, on the other side of it. And he just got up and left and, basically said, we can renegotiate our toilet paper contract and save that amount of money. For a business that's $60 billion in revenue, they just had no concept of the scale of business and value. These are little things that we kill ourselves with by not playing the devil's advocate and say, let's be the role of the customer here.
Great, thanks for those insights. Well, hopefully for everyone, this was a valuable overview of how to move towards a wallet share mindset, to put it in play, to structure a new approach that gets much bigger deals faster and mines existing customers effectively. So thanks, Scott, for the thorough overview. I know that this will be made available to attendees as a recording. So appreciate everybody's time. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.